First off, thank you so much for doing this today. Something that I always share right off the bat is that I appreciate as content creators, we are all really busy, juggling many things, competing priorities, and it can be hard to manage our time. But as they say, time is also money. So I first off always make it a point to say thank you for being on the show. And as a first question, I'm curious, I've never asked this before of anyone, but what would you say would make this be just the best interview that you've ever done?
Thank you for having me, by the way, Justin. I would say inspiring somebody, inspiring the person listening to this, not just somebody, the person listening to this that finds something in here that is helpful for them. Just one thing.
Something that I heard Alex Hormozi sharing yesterday in his new book, the idea of sometimes we're speaking one-to-one and sometimes we're speaking one-to-many. And the idea of a podcast is really interesting because in essence, it's a one-to-many by definition platform. However, as the consumer driving in my car, going for a jog, trying to sleep, but being entertained by a show, I'm listening and it really does feel like one-to-one. So I noticed that you said inspire at least someone, the listener, and it was kind of like in a single as opposed to a plural kind of idea. When it comes to podcasting, do you personally, because I know you have a lot of experience in the medium, do you think of like that listener, that avatar, that sort of thing?
I do. I think of everything in one-to-one. I'm not the biggest public speaker. I don't have much experience like on stage, but from well-experienced public speakers I talk with, they always highlight the importance of like looking at individuals in the audience. And while we can't do that recording digitally, I do that in my mind. I try to think of someone that I'm talking to. Who would this benefit? To me, I struggle with creating podcasts or creating content if it feels like I'm just talking to the void. And I find that if I actually like in my mind narrow in on somebody, it makes the content more effective. And I feel more comfortable delivering it because no matter how it does, if it connects all that stuff, in my mind, it is meant to connect with a certain somebody. And that comes across when I think of them, when I'm making it. So I see it as one-to-one. Also, when I'm writing emails for my newsletter or writing anything, I always do one-to-one. How do you do it? What do you think about it?
So for me personally, I definitely do one-to-one. And interestingly enough, it was something that really got me over that initial hurdle of becoming a content creator, if I can call myself that, but making the first video ever, making the first piece of content, even in written form. I remember, especially at the beginning, it was really, really important. I don't know that I lose sight of that as much right now, but it's almost like it's not as front of mind maybe when I'm creating. However, if I were to stop and reflect, I would probably think that I am creating for a single person, or at least be able to define it really quickly. And for me, it was a really specific example right off the bat to overcome the fear of being a creative and putting myself out there online. I realized, not to be too deep, but I realized that I only have so many opportunities to leave breadcrumbs or legacy for students that I work with, but for me, most importantly, my own children. And so what I would do when I would look at the camera, this is a hack for anyone who struggles with being comfortable creating content, is I would just speak to my daughter or one of my daughters at a time as if I was just talking to her about this topic. Should she want to learn to podcast when she's a teenager? Or should she want to start a business? Or any of the things that I talk about on growth mindset? Any piece of content, I would think of that specific of a person. Now, that's a little bit different than creating like a target avatar, maybe like Amazon does in terms of demographics and psychographics. But I'd love to know, when you create for that person that you speak of, is that someone who's a little more fictitious? Is that someone specific for you?
It's actually almost always a real person. And I've thought about that too. What you do when you create it for your daughter, because my daughter is so young, I feels a little strange to do it. Like there's an idea of making it for her, which I think one day I'll probably evolve more into. But I usually think of someone that I've talked to recently in my DMs or my comments. And I kind of think like after I post it, because I'm a creative person and I can get really in my head and make something that's like really original and doesn't really connect with people. But if I make it for this specific person that I have in my mind, and I sometimes will bring up their picture, they don't know it. I'll bring up their Instagram profile on like my computer, and then I'll make it with them in mind. Sometimes they'll comment afterwards, like, "What, you made it? It feels like you made this just for me," or something like that. And that's when I'm like, I nailed it. They don't always see it. That's not really the goal, because just because it resonates with them doesn't mean it won't with a bunch of other people. So I like to bring up usually a picture of them smiling, something like I'll look through their profile sometimes. And I don't do this for every single video or piece of content that I make, but I just find that I don't know, especially if I'm recording alone, it feels like better, because I'll say things or I'll have a certain tone. And I think the tone of our voices translates so much, even if we're watching it without the sound on a video and there's just captions for like a social media clip. So I think the tone and the body language that is translated, comes across differently, whatever headspace we're in. If we were like really hungry and just cranky and we had a bunch of things to do and we really shouldn't be doing something, but we're doing it anyways, like I'm making a video, it's going to be different than if, last night, actually, I was just I was just hanging out on the couch. I was like, all right, I'm just going to relax, turn off, about to put my phone away. And I saw there was an opportunity. I had an idea to make a video about this new product that was released. I was like, I have to make this video. But I had recorded a video a couple hours ago. And so I was like, let's just follow the inspiration and record it. But the difference in the two videos is kind of apparent. Like my eyes look a little bit more tired, and the lighting's, it's a little bit more rushed, whatever. But it's fine, but it's just different. Like all those things are translated. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's a real person. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that hack. I mean, I've certainly used that as well. Like thinking of a specific person out there in social media who doesn't know, like beyond creating for my daughter. In my daughter's case, she's 10, and she already loves creating YouTube videos. We just have them kind of piled in a folder right now because I don't know that she's quite at the level of maturity, and I don't even think in terms of service she could create her own channel yet, but she's getting really close, like a year or two away, and so we just kind of store them. But she's already creating, so maybe in that respect it makes it a little easier to think of her in that position of learning. The other thing is, because I work with so many teenagers who are in high school, I see a lot of the things and kind of like get it sort of from them, but then I just change the face to it being of my daughter in a few years from now. But that part about your daughter being so young is really interesting, because we talked off the record, I guess, just before we hopped on here, about being parents and juggling creating. You talked about being tired on the couch. That also goes hand in hand. How do you feel that you are able to juggle things and keep going?
Yeah. So for me, I'm very mindful of my tech use, right? My phone usage, my internet, like when I'm just kind of plugged into the internet, especially now more so than ever that I have an 8-month-old daughter, just because, I know she's picking up on everything. And so for me, I try to be really intentional about it, because like, I know I've been in this space long enough. I know the sky is blue right now when I look out the window, that the most interesting, best content, the best ideas will come offline. Like they're not happening when I'm like browsing, scrolling social media at 11 o'clock at night, having those real life experiences outside of an app and then sharing those experiences on the app is always going to be way more interesting than trying to live a digital life and then create that digital life on there. So part of that for me is just being mindful and intentional about how I'm spending my time and what I'm really present to. Because if I'm really tapped into like being with friends or my wife and daughter, that's going to translate way better when I go back to the app, So those things to me are really important, because I've done both extremes, I've not been online whatsoever, and I've only lived presently with my family, and it's always been amazing, of course. But then business wise and what I have to do wise, like requires me to be online now. So there has to be a balance of the two. But also when you look at content too, or just like look at what people are sharing, a lot of it is stuff that's talking about off the app, if that makes sense. I don't know if that actually answers your question, but something that was just like coming to my mind.
Yeah, it does. And it reminds me of a clip that I saw yesterday with Ed Sheeran talking about the purpose of Instagram, coming right off the heels of someone saying to me that Ed Sheeran is one of those people who doesn't use a cell phone regularly. Anyways, you don't need a cell phone to use Instagram. So I still don't know if he uses a cell phone or not. I've seen him use his cell phone on his Netflix special and on a talk show. So obviously he has one. He's not like fully avoidant of it, but I gather that he's someone who has decent balance. And he was saying that people's mental health is a lot negatively impacted when they're using Instagram to share things that aren't promotional. And that was really interesting because his point was more that we need to use it as a tool. Like you're saying, in his case, it would be, oh, I'm doing this concert. Here, take a look at it. But that concert for 6 hours and the lead up before and all of that had nothing to do with social media in and of itself. And what he's sharing is all of these offline moments, but sharing them online as a promotional tool. It could take a few seconds a day. Somebody probably does it for him half the time, but that same kind of concept. So that is really interesting. When you talk about juggling those things, the idea of being mindful of your digital use is clearly something that can be helpful. I'm curious, did you come about that naturally? Or was there a struggle that got you to having to figure that out? And were there resources, like are there books, are there other creators that you look up to when it comes to that ability to have that power of now and kind of tune into mindfulness and stuff?
Yeah. So I started out before Instagram had like really taken off, probably right around when Instagram very first started. I think this was like 2012. I had kind of created a bit of a platform for myself around sending out content. And then I took a break for a couple of years, but I was helping other people with their platforms. But during that time, not having to create any content on myself, it was very different. And I spent a lot of time meditating and like living ways that like people wouldn't quite live. I meditated twice a day for 1,200 days and just a lot of introspective work that didn't require me recording anything in front of the camera, just helping other people share their message. And then deciding to like put myself in front of the camera, it made me realize like I was kind of more, I guess, tapped into like what it's requiring of me. And very quickly I was like, I can see how this could be dangerous with all of the stuff that pops up, all the inner stuff, the ego stuff, all of the career stuff. And, what's the possibilities? What could happen if I create going? I could see a lot of things that could happen. Like my relationships could suffer if I prioritize this over so many other things. Like I could also, be successful if I stick with it. So there's like so much good and possible negative side effects that I saw. Also, because I guess I'm a little bit older, it would have been harder to see those earlier in my life. So there, I guess, is a positive of that delaying of doing this because, with age comes a bit of wisdom, hopefully. But, so just also helping other people. So not totally being like devoid of what's going on is how I've been able to manage it. But that's kind of how I'm mindful of it. How are you mindful? I'm curious. I'm always curious to hear how other people approach it.
Yeah, I'll before I forget I'll tackle that one too. But before I forget, when you started doing those things like meditating and getting more into that, how did you learn to do it? I guess like how did you learn to meditate, or how did you learn to? Were you reading someone's blog, or did you come across a book, or again was that just something that you had passed down from a different generation, or like how did you learn that? And then I won't forget to answer my version.
Yeah, I had a mentor. I think it was like 2011. 2010, and he had told me about, I didn't know anything about meditation, but he had told me about Kundalini yoga, which he's like, it's not your normal type of yoga. It's not like stretching, really. It's more breath work type stuff. So getting into that, and some parts of the class, my favorite parts were just meditating because there was meditation involved in it. And then being like, okay, how can I turn this into applicable skill? I made friends with a Kundalini teacher who I was, he was like, you should do this 30-day challenge. And I was like, okay, cool. He's like, you're going to learn a lot. I was like, all right, whatever. Like I didn't have much going on at that time. And he gave me this like meditation kind of routine to do. And then I did it. And then he was like, awesome, you did it. Wow. Most people don't stick with it. And then he's like, it's like, what's next? He's like 90 days. I was like, all right, cool. And then I think the next one was like 120. And then I remember there was a big gap. I was like, okay, I did that one. And he's like, you did that? And I kind of like that, impressing him just because this again wasn't like a social media thing. I wasn't doing it for likes. I didn't tell anybody about it really. And then I told him like, I did that. And I was like, what's the next one? He's like 1,200 days. He's like, but your life will absolutely change by the end of it. Like you won't even recognize it. There was a bunch more to it, but I'm not remembering. And, you do it twice a day. I was like, okay, cool. So I did that. And yeah, sure enough, my life completely did change. And it did, I moved across Southern California. I met my now wife. My completely career shifted. I did things that I never thought, were much of a possibility. Basically, everything flipped upside down for the better. And so through that repetition, got better. I also still like studying and learning about meditation, but I took a transcendental meditation class, I think while I was doing that 1,200 day journey. So, but I'm always like kind of curious around it. But from what I've learned and how much I've meditated, which like anything else, I still feel like a student in it, is it's one of those things that you do and you don't necessarily get super good at, but you kind of like can drop in easier, I guess, after doing it a bunch. So now I could just hop on my couch if I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed or something, and I just need a little space. And I can just hop on there and kind of drop in without it feeling like so close to all of my thoughts, is I guess how I would put it. Because that space between you and your thoughts are how you can manage the difficult times. And from someone like myself, is also how you can like highlight the good times too. You're more present with it when you just get a little space. So being like, you know what, I am just way too close to everything going on right now and I don't want to numb out. Let me just kind of just sit here and just breathe, close my eyes, set a timer for 10 minutes. And rarely will you just get sucked in and you're like, oh, the 10 minutes are up. It's usually like, has it been 10 minutes yet? Even for me. So that's kind of how I've done it. It's just been a regular practice. It's kind of a lot like going to the gym, a lot like, I don't know that I really want to do this. I can find 800 other excuses, but I've never regretted it every time I do it.
Yeah, and that's what I was curious about, like how you learned it, because I've looked into Joe Dispenza's like changing the person you are or whatever it's called. I've certainly read The Power of Now. That's one of my favorite books to not read front to back because I think it's impossible, but just to
Right.
pick up every now and again and read like one sentence and go from like maybe having some health anxiety to feeling like $1,000,000. I really, as someone who's struggled a lot myself with mental illness, back to my teen years and a bit in adulthood, it's like that book is a little cheat code. And so I'm always interested for other resources. And I still haven't forgot your question, but I want to ask one last thought though on this thread is, was that person who taught you the 30, 90, 1,200 days, was that offline or is that someone that people could look up online?
Is offline. I haven't connected with him in years, but I feel this connection with him no matter what happens. But no, that was offline. They don't have a platform. It's just someone local that I had become friends with, a yoga teacher that I just popped into class. But I will say too, like guided meditations have their place, especially like they're so good. But for me, I was also like, I want something that I can do that doesn't need to be connected to anything whatsoever. And kind of like, also like I like the gym a lot. And I was like, I want to be able to work out and not have to be like, I need this specific equipment in order to work out. I want to be able to work out anywhere. So I want to know how to do like push-ups correctly or something, right? Same with meditation. So while I find the guided meditations are helpful, there's something empowering about being able to not have your phone on you and just go to a park and just be able to sit there. So, but yeah, like both I feel like have their place, and sometimes guided meditation is awesome, but sometimes it's like, I don't really want to hear somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, only so much of the Calm app, which is amazing, but there's two
Yeah.
sides to each thing. And I love that advice about being able to do things anywhere. It's probably the advice I hated the most that Tim Ferriss said in the 4 Hour Work Week, because it's something that I needed to be better at. Like, I love the gym, I love the equipment. I have trouble being like, how can I work out at the park or at a hotel or these different things, even though I know that's a huge skill set, and especially when it comes to meditation. So that's huge. For me, you asked how I deal with kind of like the digital piece and like mindfulness. I definitely, like I said, the power of now is a book. I do like to read in short bursts. So, like right now, I'm reading Seth Godin's The Practice, and it's kind of on topic, but off topic enough that it allows me to read, again, like a little bit of a book. Like, I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm not a reader, and they're thinking that they have to crush an hour of 5 chapters in a row. Sometimes I'll pick up a book and it'll be 2 lines, and I'm like, that's enough. I feel complete in what I needed to do right now to give me sort of that mindfulness. It's like what we get off of social media, but maybe healthier. So definitely reading is one thing that I use. And it's interesting that you ask this topic, because this morning I made a note in my app where I just make little bullet points of content I could create. And I do it monthly. So I went into the August content ideas, and I might get to 0 of them. I might get to all of them. But throughout the month, anytime I think of something, I just fire it in there so that it's out of sight, out of mind. And one of the things I wrote down was do split screen of 168 hours versus being a monk. And the reason I put that was because that's the tension that I always feel, whether I notice it or not, is this idea between how can I maximize productivity? Like, how can I get up, get my kids to school, drink my coffee, get some exercise in, do some mobility work, get a little bit of breakfast. How can I write for the book that I'm creating? But then how can I still post on socials and, so on and so forth? Like, how do I time block my 168 hours of my week, still get some time with my wife and family and self-care and extended family and friends and all the things we try and compete with, versus what really truly does matter at the end of it all is, were you able to take care of yourself and really just put all those things aside to relax? And I know that the real grind mindseted people will struggle with that advice. But much like I said about being able to exercise anywhere and how that pissed me off when Tim Ferriss said it, and that was a little sign, it's probably a sign to them like that we need to just chill out a little bit too. And I know all too well, because of grief and stuff like that as well, that life's short,
Totally.
And so just doing what's important. And I think trying to keep that at the front of mind.
Totally. And I think, like, for me, because I'm in the go, go, go mode so often too, like for me, I'm like, after a while, when I've been going, I'm like, how do people do this? Like, how do people just maintain this and not go crazy? And then on the flip side of that, though, I'm like, when people are just sitting around, I'm like, how do people do this? We got one life. We got to make the most of it. I don't know how to relax. I'm like, I don't know how people do this right here so much. And that balance of the two, for me, I've been like, it's an ongoing struggle. I don't always get it perfect, but I've also just been trying to like pay attention to those times where I feel like I got to go. Like last night on the couch, I could have been like, no, I just sit on the couch. I don't make the video. That would be okay. Also, making the video is okay too. Where times where I feel like I want to push. And yeah, I just feel like sometimes too, that's where meditation, I guess, comes in handy, is like just taking a step back and kind of letting things just be, giving us the space of realizing, is this something I should be pushing or something I should just pause on? And that space to me is where the best parts come up, because then you don't feel like you're forcing something to come through. It happens more naturally, which is always more enjoyable than feeling like you're just hammering away at something, because that's cool in like the short term, but on a long enough timeline, it's going to be really draining. And then, you're going to run up against a bunch of problems in some areas. So that balance too is everything.
It's interesting you say that, because for me, creating a podcast, having a lot of awesome mentors in the space and getting competing advice from people both doing it the right way in their own respect, and then struggling to figure it out for myself, going back, a year ago, literally, I think it's exactly a year ago, where I was really having kind of a moment of like, what do I want this show to be? What direction am I taking it in? And all the things that you as a podcast consultant would be answering for people who are listening now. One of the big things that I struggled with was this idea of not necessarily productivity, because I feel that I'm pretty strong in that area as an overall topic, but specific to consistency with podcasting and deciding what the workflow is going to look like, and then what the publishing schedule should be, as well as what I can maintain. And I really struggled with that for so long without sort of getting help, I guess. Again, a lot of people will be like, well, you just need to be consistent. It doesn't matter if you publish every Monday and that's it, as long as your audience knows. And then other people are like, no, you need a 7-day-a-week show. And you'll have advice all the way through there. Create solo episodes, only interviews so people know it's on brand. And so I was dealing with a lot of those kinds of struggles. It's probably a really good time to make sure that we tackle that topic of somebody wants to start a podcast. They're tuning into this, super excited to get that sort of like masterclass in podcasting. What is your insight to people when they struggle with those types of questions?
Yeah. So first off, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, the key is to follow your interests and trust that the more interested you are, the more people will show interest in what you're talking about. You can't fake podcast stuff. You can't fake long form content and hold attention of other people, because people will sense that and tune out. So if it's authentic to you and what you're actually wanting to do, that's the foundation of everything. And then from there, building on top of that, then it's like, how can we support that interest of happening? And I've met a lot of podcasters. I don't think I've met any podcasters who got into podcasting to become a great editor and, like a great researcher. Really, those are byproducts maybe of what might happen in the beginning. But in the beginning, it's like a passion that they want to share with the world. And that passion might change a bit, and that's okay. But I think trying to define something too much early on is going to just slow things down. And I don't think I see so many people get caught in the weeds of trying to perfect something before it even had a chance. So letting an idea just be a simple flash of an idea is plenty to get you started. And then you can change it as you go. When I started my own personal brand digital podcaster, it was a random idea I had on the couch, just like the one I had last night. I didn't do any research if there were other podcast coaches, consultants out there. I just did it. I saw the name was available and I just did it. And it changed my career. It changed my life. And so, I'm proof that that is all you need to get started, and it can change everything. Those little ideas that you have. And usually you kind of know, you feel like a little bit more of a pull towards those ideas. But I will say, I think there's solid advice in that you got to be consistent, especially in the beginning, because that's where it can be the hardest to build any type of momentum. So being consistent is great advice early on, but that's usually not an issue once you've already got plenty of momentum going, because you want to see this thing through more and more. For example, the stage I'm at now, where I've made a lot of episodes, I'm publishing content, it's become such a byproduct to me that it's not like, oh, I'm not putting effort the same way I was putting effort into the first, year. So the ideas flow a little effortless. There's still some things that pop up around what should I make and things like that. But that's more creativity in general. There's going to be that friction there. What I've learned from talking to other creative individuals, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, this idea of having something that has never been done before through you, and you having to be the one to then bring that to life. That's uncomfortable because it feels like a little bit of responsibility and whatnot. And you're like, no, sure, someone else can make this, but you had the idea. You probably got to bring that to life. And ignoring that, from what I've learned from Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, which is a book that changed my life. She just talks about it's like it's going to be, the more you ignore it is really like the reason for a lot of things, negative effects that pop up in our lives, is ignoring that pull to make something. So, following that pull to make something and being consistent and not critiquing yourself. And if you're listening to this, I'm sure you're a kind person who treats others with respect. The biggest piece of advice I can give is treat yourself with that same amount of respect and kindness that you would give anybody else starting out their thing with yourself, especially in the beginning stages of a podcast or any content that you're creating.
I love that. It reminds me of golfers. And when they're first starting, they really struggle naturally, as we would. As you said, we're learning something new. And before something's easy, if it's new, it's going to be challenging before it becomes easy. And golf's definitely one of those things. But that's one of those common pieces of advice is like, you don't want to have the devil on your shoulder. You just want to have two angels on your shoulder. Like if you wouldn't talk to other people so negatively, like, oh, I suck, then why would you talk to yourself that way? And as you were talking, I also got thinking of Larry David, the creator of Seinfeld and then Curb Your Enthusiasm, when you were saying how it can be tough to still try and come up with creative ideas. And I love the clip of him saying how when he first got the pilot approved and went into the first full season, I think was 8 episodes, they got that done, but then they were approved for 24 episodes, and he cried to his wife because he was worried that he wouldn't be able to come up with 24 ideas. And that's so bang on in terms of what we're talking about, because I consider him an absolute creative genius. Of course he is. There's no denying that he's one of the best storytellers on TV, yet he was crying going from the pilot to 8 episodes and then from 8 episodes to 24 because he was scared that he wouldn't be able to come up with that many ideas. And I think that's just so cool and reassuring for anyone new to starting out. Speaking of being new to starting out, like, how did you learn? Because you said that you were on the couch and you had this idea, you hadn't done research yet. So then how did you learn podcasting?
So I went to school. I'm 34 now. I stopped paying attention my senior year of high school because they changed the credits, and I basically got super lucky, and the credits I had was like enough. So I basically needed just anything above a D in my senior year to like get out of there, because I was like, I'm going to school for recording. None of the subjects here about recording. So I wanted to go to school for audio engineering like right away and producing. So that is what I did. I went to school right out of there and apprenticed at studios, and then worked at recording studios, and then got more exposed to the music industry. And I was like, this isn't exactly what I thought it was. So I got into digital marketing and did online business. And then in around 2016, I took over a client's podcast, and I was like, this is awesome. This is my two intersections aligning. And I honestly, if I would have realized it then, I would have made the obvious selection to like double down into podcasting. But it's somehow, I'm a slow learner. It took me until 2021 to realize on the couch that day of, oh my gosh, you have all this digital marketing experience and online business experience and audio engineering and producing audio is your passion. Like, combine the two. It was just like a download. And so had I realized that sooner, it would have just came to light, but it is what it is. And so it's something I've basically been working on for years between the two. And it just came to life. So I had been working with clients, but never done my own content. And I've learned way faster doing it myself than just doing it for other people. And it's been helping me share more. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah. And so when starting up your show, it was probably somewhat straightforward, perhaps, in that you already had an idea, right? Maybe there were some growing pains and whatnot. You could share some of your own experience, but either way, when someone comes to you and they're like, hey, I want to start a podcast, but I have no idea how the heck to get started, you already had the audio background that helps a ton. But when someone's brand new, sitting there listening to this and they're like, I want to start a show, what sort of steps do you walk them through?
Yeah, I will say it was not easier for me. I was like, I got a rebellious part of me that's just like, I want to do it differently. So I did not want to start my own podcast, really. I wanted to be the guy that helped other people with their podcasts, but didn't have one of my own. My therapist was like, sounds like you should start a podcast. And I was like, nah, I'm going to be that one person who's like, you really don't have one? I don't yet. So she kind of nudged me to do it. So I did it begrudgingly, but I also want to say that as the more experience and things I learn, it doesn't get easier. Like, it definitely doesn't get easier the more you learn. Like, I have so much knowledge inside of my head of different things and different directions, and so much I've learned. It only creates like, analysis paralysis, like unable to decide which direction to go. So yeah, having all this in my head, and then there's like a bar set of like, this is what it needs to sound like. So sometimes knowing less is better because you can make decisions, just like how I didn't do any research about podcast consultants and then hopped right in. That was better because more research wouldn't have helped me. So it wasn't easier for me necessarily in the beginning. I didn't have a clear idea. I'm still like kind of like working through my own. And most people that come to me with their podcast are actually in a similar situation. Even if they're in a business and their business idea is clear, they're unsure of how to do it in a way that maximizes the value for the audience. And so helping them get clear on that really comes down to thinking about kind of their own goals and where their listener is fitting the show into their life. Like if it's some quick little thing, it doesn't need to be, done in the same way everyone else is doing it. So figuring out a format that works specifically for them and their goals is important. And that goes the same for everybody too. For a while, I was doing like 5-minute podcasts solo, and that was perfect. But then my needs have changed and my ability to, do the podcast has changed. So that evolved with time. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's kind of vague, and I could give more maybe concrete guidance if you think I could nail that. But I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah, no, it does for sure. And this is a great meta sort of moment because to me, it's just an example of what podcasting, especially with a guest and like the partnership and teamwork that it takes to create episodes and interviews, is like on full display right now. Because I always feel like, and I'm not just being a nice person, that answers are always answered in the way that they are, right? And not to be too philosophical, but yeah, of course it does answer the question. Almost always it makes me think of many other questions, which in this case, of course, it did, which was the idea of people struggling with that concept of a niche or a niche, because in your case, you wanted to tackle podcasting. When people want to start a show, how do you advise them when it comes to like, should it be about basketball or basketball in the state of Michigan? Or when talking through the idea of niche, what are some wisdom that you can share?
Yeah. So thinking of different examples here for myself, because like I'm unclear, especially in the beginning, of who it's for, doesn't mean that I have to stop and get clear. Like people could still listen to it, but understanding myself that it might be slower, because if it's not laser targeted to a certain audience, then naturally people are not going to find out about it as easier. It's not going to speak to like, I need to know this right now. I just, within the last couple of weeks, am in the process of launching a local podcast for my community. And that has been such a learning experience because I'm used to doing things on like globally, not just in the population of like 40,000. And how much easier it is for just this community is blowing my mind. I feel like I am a black belt in like a different type of martial art or something, that I'm like, this is so easy to speak to the demands of just the city. Like this is incredibly easy. So it's much easier to zero in on a specific target audience. But on the flip side, like how much creativity am I going to be able to express through my community podcast? It's going to be different. Like I'm only going to be able to feature so many people here. Yeah, there's a lot of people and I can find stories like that, but will it be super creatively fulfilling for myself? Probably not on the same as if like I had more control over something. So just realizing that, and also now having hosted my own podcast, Digital Podcaster, for a little while now, I can say that, and I have majority of my episodes are teaching and educational about how to podcast. You think about the lifespan of a listener listening to your podcast, what keeps them coming back. Only talking about podcasts for, I think, a good amount. Like people are going to binge that occasionally, but people fall in and out of like needing education around podcasts, for example. That's not something that's like an ongoing thing that they need to listen to every week for a year. So realizing that and kind of setting that expectation in of like, people are going to come in, probably binge a bunch of episodes and then head out. Doesn't mean that like people won't constantly be coming in and out, but realizing the recurring like listeners, they don't they're not coming back for like the news. They're not coming back for the latest topics. And a lot of people just want to be in the know and they want to get what they need and be educated or entertained. So kind of like building into some of those expectations too, to the format, I think is important. So yeah, I don't know if that, does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that you have going for you with the clarity of your show, though, is as a podcaster, any of us who it's much like having a really good book. And that's something that I'm working on right now is a book on how to podcast because I don't think we could have enough of those. You know, people think of like saturated markets, and I'm like, I'm telling stories in every paragraph about specific interviews and struggles that I had creating my show. So nobody can create that book. It's not like I just fired into Chat GPT, hey, write me a book on how to podcast and then publishing it. There is a lot of those. It's not just like a lead magnet or something. It's like a legit book. But when it comes to the idea of going back to a resource, that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I said in the introduction was that this should be something that you could pick up at any time. Like I mentioned about Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now, right? That's more the mindset of this book is, yeah, you could read it from beginning to end, more like a guide, highlight some stuff, and then go start your show. And, or you can pick it up 6 years into your career publishing daily podcast episodes, because it's always good for us to have refreshers. And I find a show like yours is really valuable as a podcaster to go hop into an interview you've done recently, or even if you post something about marketing podcasts to be like, yeah, listening to it. If I were like putting check marks every time I learned something brand new for the first time, maybe there wouldn't be as many of them the further along the journey I get, but it's really good sort of reminders, right? And so I feel like the clarity really helps in that area. I'm tempted to start a second show for the same reason that like, and I have to fight that so much. Like I wanted to start a newsletter and podcast all around the mindset for golfers, like the how to have the psychology of golf dialed in so that you can really, you know, impress your buddies and that they won't know how you're doing it. And it's so specific, right? Like not talking about swings, just talking about psychology and mindset, but I've had to avoid that shiny object a little bit for now.
I'm like so into the idea lately of hyper niche subjects. Like my YouTube algorithm is like things that I didn't think of that I would be interested in. So the idea of a newsletter, for example, around the mindset of golfers, as someone that has taken a lot of golf lessons, my dad is a heavy golfer. I, would still be interested in that. And I'm not the biggest golfer by any means, but something about someone that is so passionate about something and just explores something at such depth, I feel like brings so much value to people these days, no matter what the subject is. And I guess that's partly why I say like the more interested the podcast host is, the more interested the listener is. Because if you can really dive super deep into something that people would pass over or that don't even necessarily care about, they latch on to your interests and they're like, take me wherever you're going. I don't care what you're talking about. You're just so into it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't fake that. And that to me is like everything. I'll watch a long video about something, about the display screen on like a little thing that I'm going to replace this thing. I find it so fascinating.
Yeah, true experts. Like, and I find that way when we're dealing with any practitioner. It could be a doctor or fitness professional or nutritionist or whatever. When you get true experts, you're like, oh, this is like the Mamba mentality stuff that Kobe Bryant had, practicing, 2 or 3 times a day, realizing that within a year, no one's going to be able to catch him because he's that much more of an expert than everyone else. And I find that really inspiring, really interesting. The funny thing is, I'm saying that as I have a pretty generic show myself.
I mean, I know it, like, I feel that way with a lot of my stuff too, but I will say though too, like, I don't know that they necessarily have to be an expert because I don't know. I don't see myself as an expert, although like I'm referred to one, but I also find myself watching things that, while they might, I guess, be perceived as an expert in some sense, like something about the interest or just like a documentary, for example, like the person making the documentary doesn't necessarily have to be a subject matter expert. I know, and like maybe, I guess, I don't know. Sometimes I get intimidated by the word expert, because I feel like I has a responsibility that I have to know everything rather than like enthusiast, where I could just be really excited about something. That's just me. But yeah, because I don't know. I see also people struggle with, I'm not an expert in the thing. I'm like, I don't know. It's a lot, especially publishing content and being wrong. You know,
Mm-hmm.
being wrong has to be one of the bigger fears, and I still have that fear. I'm like, I do know this, right? Even though I'm like yes, but double check
Yeah,
myself.
no, that's definitely something I stand for, and that's the whole idea behind the podcast. Just keep learning. On
Yeah,
most socials, I had and have. I'm going more towards just using my normal name, but Just Tries was the original handle, with the first idea I had, and the whole concept was like we're all just trying to figure this stuff out. Like I don't know.
yeah,
I want to try making documentaries and doing YouTube. I also love blogging, so like I'm going to try this. I tried e-commerce. I'm the person who bought a bunch of merchandise and then had it still sitting on my shelf.
yeah.
I tried so many things. Podcasting was what I fully fell in love with, at least more than the others, and so that's what I really am doubling down on. But I love that idea of learning and building in public and letting people see firsthand all of those, call them failures or learning moments or whatever it is. But I definitely believe in that. Before we close the loop kind of on podcasting, I'd love to ask about some of the things that are very hard to answer. And I say that because I appreciate that they're just not easy to answer. And it's people who are, in the side hustle mode, in the I want it to be full-time mode, or they would rather not go into the 9 to 5. Could they start a podcast and turn it into a legitimate business? You have a background in digital marketing, combine it with audio to succeed. When you get into those modules, I'm not sure if it's in your course stuff that you teach, but the idea of like the marketing and the monetization stuff, how the heck do you make money and succeed as a podcaster? Is it actually possible? That whole world, what are some things that you help people with?
Yeah. So I look at it like a gradual thing. I get asked a lot, like, hey, is this possible? Especially by, younger people that are like, hey, I really like podcasting. Can I make a living off this? And I'm just as transparent as I can be. Like, there's different problems. There's always going to be problems, right? Like, we're never just going to not have any problems. There's always going to be something that pops up that we can deal with. And when it comes with podcasting and like career wise, there's still going to be problems. It's just different problems. And do you want to deal with those problems? And I will say, if you're monetizing, your podcasts, it's like there's still struggles. It places a different level of stress, and there's different factors for everybody on like what they can handle. So it's totally possible. It's just a matter of like when and how. And the when is like realistically, if you're starting from scratch, the likelihood of you publishing your podcast and someone just coming along and handing you a check is like probably not going to happen. Not saying it won't happen, but like also if you're publishing, you're putting yourself in the position for that opportunity to ever present itself. So it definitely won't happen if you're not doing it. We got to get that out of the way because it wouldn't exist and no one will see your content. Anything can happen when you're publishing content. I don't mean to make it sound like a lotto ticket, but reality is like I've met so many people I would have never met if I didn't keep just publishing. So crazy things can happen. And I think that's exciting, but it's a wild card. You can't bank on just crazy things happening. Be like, but you kind of need a little part of that too, or else it'd be kind of boring. So anything can happen. You can meet anybody. And the hard part of that though is the timeline and making it a predictable certain income. If you're relying on advertising and sponsorship money and you're starting from scratch, it's going to be way different than if you already have an audience built and you're podcasting and you got money coming in. So there's other ways you can monetize. I don't use sponsorships and ads. Like, I'm self-sponsored. I have my own company and products that I sell, and that buys me some certainty because I'm not thinking about like, oh, I need to navigate these brand deals. So I monetize through that way. So it's kind of like I'm running a business that then self funds my podcast essentially. And there's that certainty there. I personally don't like the uncertainty around money of being like, if this brand deal doesn't work out, then I don't know how I'm going to have next month's rent. Um, so I like more certainty. Other people navigate the brand deal space in a different way, but that's something you work up to as well. It's not something, we're seeing. There's a popular podcast right now. The host named Bobby. People like, she came out of nowhere, but she had already built an audience for like a couple of years before. Now she's everywhere. She's interviewed with Drake. and all these people. So she didn't just pop out of nowhere. She's been around. Just seemed like she popped out of nowhere. And so, how many of those that we don't hear about? There's a lot. So I think navigating it smart, and if you can, hold out on trying to take anything that would jeopardize your authenticity. So, whether that's like finding another source of income while you just build it up, because that authenticity and like your interest, like stay interested as long as you can. And ideally, you find ways to monetize that prop up what you're doing rather than try to change or alter what you're doing by any means. So the goal, it always starts with an awesome podcast though, or awesome content that you're creating, because nothing else will matter. Like a lot of all my content feeds into my business. So like this is essentially without the content, it's hard to make the business run. And then for my business, I make content. So it kind of like goes back and forth. And it's all about adding value to people. And you got to make sure that the money that you're taking is helping you do that, not subtracting from that or making you, second guess yourself or stress out, because that content is going to be way different than like you just passionately sharing what you're up to and enjoying.
Mm-hmm. You said it all starts with the great content. So solo, interview, a hybrid show, or otherwise, doesn't matter. But when making great content, what are some things people should keep in mind?
Yeah. First thing, of course, that comes to mind, and it's worth repeating, is you being interested, but also there having other people who are interested. So like with podcasts, some people are like, I don't care if it grows or it doesn't, anybody listens to it or something like that. And it's like, well, then why would you post it? Like, why do you promote? What are you doing? Save your money and time and write in a journal or something. So like content to me is like best when there's, if it was a Venn diagram, it would be like your interest as the creator. There's an audience that has an interest for it. And then in the middle is like your content. So there's two interests there. It doesn't have to be every aspect of your life. It doesn't have to be super, everything who you are stands for as a human being. Like it doesn't have to be that. It just could be a little sliver. Like I don't record content with my family or my personal life much at all, but I still have been able to build and grow an audience and business. And there's an audience for what I'm making. So that's where I try to find that intersection. And to me, that's the great content, because everybody's happy, like people that are consuming it and people that are making it. And that I think sustains both the creator, because we act like we don't need, the self-validation of what we're making. But in reality, once again, like we wouldn't make it if we didn't want an audience to receive it. So, there's a little bit of like the audience needs to enjoy it. I think at a certain level, especially if it's like made with any type of commercial intentions, like monetizing, but you also have to be interested in it, or else it's not going to be fulfilling. And then you're going to like stop it before not too long.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Bobby. I do know who you're talking about. I don't know the name of her show. It may be named after her name. I have no clue. Do you know if that is the name of her show or what her show even is?
No. It's
and we need not look it up. You may look it up, of course, but it's funny because my point more so is that it doesn't really matter. And it's funny that people are saying, oh, she came out of nowhere, when she has been creating for a long time, has built a brand. And I don't even know the name of her show, but I know firsthand who you're talking about. And I've seen quite a bit of her content, which just speaks to the fact that there are so many different ways to do this. And I was reflecting a little bit too when you first mentioned her and how people think she came out of nowhere. I mentioned at the top of the show about Alex Hormozi. I think a lot of people would also, put him in that category, because in the last year, he's like really quadrupled down on YouTube and putting money and investing into micro content and, short form videos, and really, really starting to go viral every time he posts, right? Like he's made it. Let's say he hit the tipping point. But I listened to his podcast yesterday for the first time, and it's episode like 375 or something.
Yeah. So the Bobby's podcast, just looked it up. It's called The Really Good Podcast, which is
right.
A hilarious name. And yeah, and Alex Hormozi, same way. The one thing that about Hermosi that sticks out to me though is that he, did so much offline, and then he pops up and he has all this helpful tips and whatnot that he's learned personally and has learned through, you know, his network of people that he's been with for years. And, he's such a great example to me of someone that does a great job of like not just perceiving, himself online to be a certain way. I think he's pretty mindful. Like he has a high value on his values. He wants, um, from what everything I've seen, he wants things to be like really valuable, which I think is cool. And it's years that he wasn't posting and trying to like spend money on, wasn't spending any money on that stuff. Maybe he was making content a little bit, but he wasn't taking it very seriously. And so I just think it's cool because it's just different than what we see. We see a lot of people build stuff online and then like promote it before there's actually something. Mm-hmm. And then, it's like they're learning advice while they're selling advice versus someone who has lived it and then is giving advice. Like those are two different things,
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that they both do really well is they take clips and spread them across social media super effectively. And that's why so many people are saying they've popped out of nowhere or they're seeing them for the first time. In that respect, that's one of your definite expertise, is the idea of clip creation, right? It's a big part of your business. When it comes to the idea of creating a show and being able to share clips like those two did, or however you teach it in workshops or whatever, what are some things that you would tell people to keep in mind?
Yeah. So what makes those creators so great and their clips so great is that they stand alone. They don't need context going into it. You don't need to know that Alex Hormozi did anything before you watch the clip. Some people might go, who is this guy? That's okay. But like a vast majority of people who come across a Bobby clip or Hormozi clip are not questioning, just like, you go to the dentist and you're not like, hey, can I see your diploma? Where did you go to school? Where did you study dentistry at? People just care about what they, how they feel when they see you, all the subtle nuances that are happening inside the clip, and that they walked away with something from the clip, which will lead them to come to the next one. And people get that when they watch their clips. So a strong clip should stand on its own, and it should be contextual to what the audience is used to seeing. So that looks like, using easy to read fonts, colors that catch the eye, but maybe are not too overstimulating depending on the audience that you're trying to attract. And I see people get this wrong of needing to add too much context in or over speaking because there's this fear of they won't be understood. So they add in too much. And that doesn't make the clip stronger. If anything, you can usually remove way more than you might even feel comfortable with at first. And the clip will perform better. So it's really about like whittling down to one main idea in a clip and then making it look kind of blend in with the platform just enough that it doesn't stand out in a bad way.
I feel like it was on your show that I was listening to an episode about clips and you used an acronym.
Yes.
The acronym, I think, was clips. Now, I realize that I might be putting you on the spot by asking something so specific, because if it's not something you use every day, I know what it's like to create solo episodes, and I'm typing like any writer and an author, and then like I'm like, oh, this paragraph's awesome, and then I put it into a solo episode, and someone asks me about it later, and I'm like, just remind me what I said, because yes, it was me that said it. It was all original, but I just need a refresher, and then we can discuss it. But so I may be putting you on the spot, but
I love it. And my brain, this is just how my brain works, is like I don't hold much information in my head, I guess you could say. So I rely on like certain like libraries and things like that, or reminders. Mm-hmm. Just my reminder setup is kind of crazy. But yeah, I've created a framework that is for finding and editing the clips. I'll just give you like a brief rundown. So clips stands for, again, it's for creating the clips from your podcast, but the C stands for capturing key moments. The L stands for length optimization. I stands for improve visual appeal. P stands for promote on social media. and S stands for study performance. The capture key moments is like you got to highlight the thing that people are going to want to have more of. It's kind of like the best part of the pie. If you were serving a pie, make sure that you don't just give all crust. Give some of the good middle part. Length optimization is what I was just talking about, where you want to make just enough context, but not too much context. I is making it kind of what we were talking about here, visually appealing to the people that will be consuming it. P is for publishing it essentially and making sure that you're publishing it in accordance to what the platform needs for it to not just get suppressed on the algorithm. And then S is study for performance, which is looking back over and seeing like what performed best so that you have an idea of how to basically start back at the beginning and what are the key moments we need to highlight. And then each of those areas that I just highlighted, the clip part of the framework.
Pretty well a mic drop style moment. I love it. I feel like that. I feel like that framework, that acronym in and of itself, the idea of clips, will be something that people will actually take and then use step by step as they go forward, making their own clips for their shows. Naturally, we have to eventually wrap a show, and this was actually something I was writing about today too, because I feel like people who are first getting into podcasting often stress about, I have these 300 things I want to ask this guest because maybe I'll never be able to ask them again. And then it really takes away from the ability to just have a good conversation, which I think is the most important part. And then after that, if we can put our priorities in terms of topics into the show, great. But that should always come after the ability to just have a great interview. However, we have to wrap sometimes. And so pretty soon, we'll get to those theme questions and kind of move on. But the thing that's always nice is that we could do a number 2 in a year from now or something like that. So I never really worry too much about that. And that's what I tell other people too. However, before we do close the loop on podcasting, because that's your background, that's your business, that's your expertise, we've talked a ton about it. But is there anything that we'd be leaving out that you teach in your workshop or your masterminds or anything that would be weird to move on from that you would have liked to share?
I don't think so. I think we covered a good amount. There's always, it's one of those things, the more you look at it, the more you can like pick out. So yeah, there's like a topic in every kind of area of it. But I feel like we covered a good amount, and there's nothing that I'm like, wait, I wish I said that, other than if you're thinking about just do it essentially and try it out and just give it a shot, and don't worry about all of the specifics because those will just get in the way and they're things you can fix later on.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't ask many yes or no questions, but that is definitely one of them that I like to ask because the answer can be, nope, we're good, let's move on. It's just, it would suck if there was something where you're like, oh shit, I this was the one thing I wanted to say. So another idea of an infinite game, because that's what you're saying, is that podcasting is basically an infinite game. And so the other one that has come up a lot today is creativity and art. I would love to just ask, as we head into the theme questions, how you do cope with the idea of being multi-passionate, because you shared really at the beginning that I can't remember the words you used, but you said if you make something, I think you said genuine, and you get too creative that it can be confusing to people. And right off I understood right away what you meant, but because a lot of people may not understand what you meant, and you've mentioned a couple of times your brain works kind of crazy, how do you deal with being multi-passionate and being a content creator?
Yeah, I try to deal with it by kind of what I said, like taking care of myself, because having ideas and wanting to execute the ideas is both a blessing and a curse. A curse in the way of like when you don't get to execute an idea, sometimes it can feel like a bummer. So not being able to bring that to life is definitely like, oh, well, I wish I had more time to do this. And especially when the ideas are just flowing and you don't have all the time in the world to just dedicate on them, you have to like let some things go. But that's something that I always try to like improve at. But being like multi-passionate, or I have like a weird sense of humor. So sometimes when I'll be making content, sometimes it's just fine. Everything just flows. Other times I just want to make like really weird stuff that is funny to me, but like won't be that funny to somebody else. Or maybe they wouldn't find it that interesting. I don't know, that I don't like nail that still. I still make some stuff that is so silly. Probably there's like a humanizing element to it. But I made a video that I think is posting any minute now about underwater microphones, you know, and I couldn't not make the video because I just felt it was so interesting to me. And I mentioned in it that if Finding Nemo started a podcast, this would be the type of microphone he uses. That is something that is like, how many people does that apply to? You know, like there's people who will be like, that's funny and silly and whatever. But from a more commercial aspect or like business aspect, it's hard to quantify those things too. So I have ideas like that cruise through my brain and I'm like, I got to make this. I battle that by also having multiple platforms. So I have like, I don't know exactly currently, but I have another account where I like to share more story, like more documentary style things. Basically, also, all of the other platforms I've created go viral and they have way more views than like my business ones.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So I let those outlets be more creative and not follow any strict guidelines. But with my, more business focused ones, I let creative ideas pop in, but I do realize that there's people there that are having somewhat of an expectation around a certain topic. And I don't want to completely alienate them. And I don't want people to feel bad. Like, I don't understand what's going on, especially if it's related to like my business, because I want people to just really feel welcome. On the flip side of that, that's why I have other platforms. So I'm like, I don't care if you don't understand it because it's not affecting business. There's nothing there. So, having that outlet for me has been really beneficial.
It's a good strategy. I wanted to ask because the idea of having, ADD or ADHD comes up on this show a lot. The idea of having crazy minds, and people say that my brain makes their brain hurt. Like I've had multiple people tell me that. I'm like, sorry. But that idea of just that creative chaos comes up a lot on this show. That probably could have been the title of the show, to be honest, because it comes up pretty much every episode, which is awesome. I love hanging out with our people, I suppose, and creating for all of us. So I just wanted to make sure that I asked on it, but it feels like almost that could be a teaser for the next time we do an episode.
Yeah, it is like, and it's a subject I love too, because I definitely feel that way. And the ADHD thing too, like definitely resonate with it. And I think a lot of people are that way. And I think it's just part of like figuring it out, most people I speak with. And I mean, I've made so much content around podcasting. So if there's anyone that could like run out of content, you would have think I would have ran it out of it by now. But I keep finding things. And so there's gold in like sticking with it. But it's also one of those things too, like not everyone could just stick to a subject. So keeping it more broad is sometimes the only solution.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I think there's a special place for a role or responsibility or business where it's just idea generation alone, human idea generation, not AI. Because I was thinking about that today. I was like, I couldn't stop going down to my notes app to make notes for content ideas just so that I could stay focused on the book that I was trying to write. But if I have an idea, I have to write it down or else it'll be too distracting. And I was like, holy shit, I've had like 12 ideas and it's been like an hour. Oh my gosh, and I think they were good, and they'd be even better for a better creator. Like if I gave those 12 ideas to Mosey, there's this next 12 viral videos, and when will I get around to making them? Will I get around to making them? But at least they're jotted down. But it's been weird to learn that some people, their brain doesn't work like that. They're like, how do I come up with an idea? And I'm like, what?
Yeah, and my like passion this week actually, because I think of constantly these ideas similar, is like people who have an idea but like have trouble fleshing it out and getting it out. Like that's something that I would love to help more people on, because it's, I'll meet people that are like, I have this idea, but then like I don't know how to take it from this to that, and I would love to help more people around that, because I am good at that. I've created businesses this year that, not like actual businesses, but like the landing page, even the checkout links, the whole thing, for things that nobody have seen. Logos, brand missions, ideal client avatars. I've created entire things that someone could probably just take over and then scale. but part of it started as just an idea, and I know a lot of people have struggled with that, of like going from idea to the bigger execution of it, which is, yeah, interesting.
Well, maybe we should build something together someday
I know, right? Or partly build it and then
and leave it.
let it die.
That'd be very on brand. That's too good. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I love, like I said, building in public, creating in public, and teaching while creating, which is can be hard to do, but right now is a great example. And like, I'm going to move into the theme questions and wrap as much as like I've got so many thoughts about things that we could talk about. So definitely someday we'll have to do a episode number 2. But the first theme question that I ask people is always, what is one thing that you are learning right now?
One thing I'm learning is how to navigate basically the ups and downs of online business and keep things like just extra steady. So I launched one of my businesses, Content Clips, like a year ago, basically a year ago, and it's grown, and like learning to like have the growth be steady but also innovate, and just kind of balancing the whole digital business space has been something I'm constantly learning. Also, scheduling time to schedule time. I'm pretty good at scheduling. I'm really actually really good with a schedule, but I forget to schedule time where I just schedule more time. So I'll schedule like a week out or 2 or 3 or whatever, but I don't put in my calendar like, hey, this is when you're going to schedule time, because once that goes away, then things start to mess up. So I gotta learn. I'm learning how to do that better. Yeah.
I should do that too. This would be hard for the audio only listeners. They could hop over to YouTube or wherever the video clips exist. But you mentioned that idea of being able to stay focused. And is that something that you feel your tattoo helps you with?
Yeah. So I have the tattoo "Stay on Target" on my arm. When I got it, guess it's kind of similar, but I always see it as like, stay focused on like what I value most, and in different areas of life, relationships, and kind of inner stuff. Not so much. I get pretty locked in on tasks when I know where I'm going. So sometimes though that can have a negative consequence if I get locked in on the wrong task, or I get locked in on something that's not serving me best. So that stay on target kind of idea reminder is more so like what really matters. What should I be doing with my time to spend it wisely while I'm here? And yeah, so it's both a blessing and a curse to be focused. It's like whatever it is that I'm focused on is going to amplify, and I got to use that power for good.
On the right thing. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Well, the tattoo reminded me of interviewing Terrence McMahon earlier in the year, and I said to him that it's a distraction in a good way. In his case, I could see like the ocean and boats in the background the whole time I was interviewing, and in this case, like I was reading the tattoo a few times throughout, and like it was distracting, but in a good way, because it made me think of exactly that, staying on target, which was cool. Maybe this is it, but maybe there's something else that comes to mind. But the second question is one piece of advice. If you could only leave one piece of advice for the next generation, having a daughter, maybe it comes more naturally. What would your piece of advice be?
My piece of advice would be, you can do things your way. And I think that we've, more so now than ever, we have certain expectations placed upon us by society and just culture that, we always feel like we should be somewhere, we should be doing something. And I know that none of that really matters. You can do things your way. And also, like, the better you take care of yourself, the more you're going to be able to do things your way. And the more you're going to be able to, be there for those around you, because doing things alone is not fun. I've done that for years, and it's like, you don't want to do it alone. So life is best shared with others, but you can do it your way, and it can look better than you possibly imagined. And, looking and doing things your way doesn't necessarily mean just business. Like, it looks like whatever it is that you're doing, creativity, um, you know, working out, nutrition, like what is the ways that make sense for you, I think is just vitally important for more people to understand.
Yeah. That's why I find it hard to share blanket advice, because I always end up coming back to, if it's respect to parenting or learning or something, I'm always like, well, the problem here is it scales to the individual as much as our DNA really scales to the individual. And so I'm very appreciative of that. It's one of the challenges that we have as podcasters as well, because we're trying to create for one person, but also hopefully more than one person, by giving some like general ideas and tips and tricks. But it's like, well, if we could just pull someone on here and ask them the questions about their specific podcast, it'd be a lot easier to kind of help them out. So, but I think that's awesome. I'm sure your daughter would appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, and the more experts I meet, the more it's like, they struggle with this because it's like they want to give individualized advice because they know that's the key. But the reality is, like, you can't do that and to create something at the same time, but they see other people do it and they're like, but they're doing it wrong, and it's like they're giving out the wrong advice. And so it's like, it's finding that balance. And yeah, at its core, just remembering like you've got everything, and you are absolutely unique, and that's what makes things interesting.
As creators, it's like, how do we build the choose your own adventure blueprints and field manuals for people as effectively as possible, which, like, it's again, it's another infinite game.
Yeah, but I think that's all the stuff offline. I think that a lot of that happens. It happens together with people, but I think you don't discover that through an app, or maybe it's like meditation app, but like you discover that stuff offline, then you bring it to other people. You discover it offline, you bring it to other people. It's like all the living, happens. It's like it's the best stories don't come from like it's just exactly something that happened online. It's usually as a result of something that might happen in real life. So, reminding people to like life is happening off the screen too.
Yeah, now the creative juices are flowing, because it's like, imagine a show called Beyond the Platform. Like, where would you publish it?
Yes, right? Mail.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's start mailing people.
Yeah.
That's funny. You're a podcaster, so this should come naturally. But like, if you were to take the mic, take the lead on the conversation, and ask me a question, what's something you would ask?
I would ask you, what is most exciting, or let me try that again. What are you most excited about for the future of your own podcast?
One of the things that I'm really excited about that I kind of talked on earlier was the idea that pretty much 12 months ago, I was getting advice from, it was David Meltzer and John Lee Dumas at the time, who were in my ears saying different tips about like how to grow out this show. And it was awesome. And I really appreciated two people who have insanely successful podcasts giving me advice, but it still didn't feel like my own kind of rhythm and cadence. And so it's funny, because your question could have been, why did you pod fade for the last 8 weeks? But that was intentional. I wanted to take some time to just, like we were talking about earlier, to just sit on the couch, so to speak. But it was going camping, and it was like taking my kids on a bike ride, and not stressing that like, oh, did everybody get this in line for the upload? And is this content ready to go out? And are these show notes done? Like, I just wanted to catch my breath while I figured out what exactly the cadence of the show will be. I've done a lot of interviews in the last week, so this is like probably the 15th or something. So,
I'm sure it's the best one, but you didn't have to. You didn't have to.
Yeah, that but part. There is one next Monday too. Maybe I can do what, who does that? I think it's on maybe the Playboy. I forget what podcast, but he always asks, Stephen Bartlett always asks the guest to ask the next guest a question. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's kind of interesting. Maybe you can ask a question for that one as well. But yes, it will. I'm sure it'll be the best one. We'll let the audience decide. It's all about them. But just being able to be consistent with that newfound cadence, because I was stuck between interview shows, solo shows, how many, when, and like just like an insane level of randomness. And now I have a good plan that I'm excited to share with everybody come September 1st. And really, it's not like a rebrand or a relaunch, really, because the show's going well and everyone's wondering why there haven't been episodes and things are going well. But just to get that consistency and clarity back, that you just said it in your piece of advice, actually, now that I realize, for me, right? Because I was getting it from so many different mentors, which was cool. That's a natural progression in life. I always tell people, as a personal trainer, initially you start wandering around the gym not knowing what to do. Then you start Googling workouts and following them like to a T. Then you start getting workouts prescribed for yourself. And then when you become the real guru is when you can walk into the gym and do what your body needs in that moment. And so I feel like I'm getting closer to that as a podcaster, where the consistency will exist because I have a better plan for myself. The most exciting thing for me about this, which is why it's not tough to scale, but why it's so important to figure those pieces out, is because I love the interviewing, right? And that's the stuff you can't outsource. But I love it so much that it's not necessarily like a part of a funnel to like another business thing for me. It's a matter of more like Rogan-esque interviewing and having good conversations. And I feel like things are starting to get to a place where that's more sustainable to do that. Like, I would almost like it to be like a radio show where every morning an episode was published, like to that extent of content, because I'm pretty sure I've heard you share this before too. Like, I'll never get around to the thousands of great people that exist to collaborate with. So I might as well just keep going and seeing how many I can work with. But it's getting to a point where time management, the age of my children, my own understanding is finally there with all this stuff, that it's people will soon enough be like, oh, he popped out of nowhere, I guess.
And those opportunities, like, what do they say? It only presents itself when luck and hard work intersect, something like that. Yeah.
No, for sure. And that's the luck. Yeah. There's signs that the luck's coming,
Yeah. I love it. That's amazing.
It's exciting. And for me, it's exciting because it just all further fuels, and I know you're the exact same way, to be able to help more people, right?
Yeah. And the conversations, they inspire, and you have one idea of how you think it's going to go, and then it goes a different direction. And that's exciting too. Like, it takes a life of its own.
For sure. Living, breathing, organic creature of creativity that is the art of podcasting, I suppose. The last final thing is why and where people could find your work online.
Yeah. Why is, if you're interested in digital entrepreneurship whatsoever, and around the content creation side of things, I share a lot about that. You can learn about me at dylanschmidt.com. That's because there's, probably 3 ways really you spell Dylan. Dylan, last name Schmidt, schmidt.com. And that's where I put everything. So just check that out if you're interested. And that's it, really.
Awesome. And that's the true mic drop moment. It's been a pleasure. It's been really fun. And like I said, I'm sure we'll create something together in the future, because this has been great. And just thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Justin. I'm honored to be here.
End scene.
Sweet.